Are you considering being a flight attendant? Is it worth it being a flight attendant? I know there's so many videos out there talking about how bad the pay is, how bad the work conditions are, but is it ultimately worth it being a flight attendant? Is it worth your time? Is this a career you should consider going into? Stay tuned as I share some of the points to consider as you make this decision. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Priscilla, a New York-based flight attendant working with a major US airline company. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button real quickly to become part of the family. Also, like the video and share your thoughts on today's video in the comment section below. In today's video, I will be talking about a hot topic, y'all. Like, it's a hot topic. I know there's several videos out there that talks about the job or us being flight attendant or the career as a whole. And a lot of the time, people tend to focus on the negative aspects, the pay being bad, the conditions being bad, being on reserve, blah, 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 among other things. I honestly do not blame those people because people tend to be more interested in negative conversations or negative topics or topics that evoke negative emotions, right? So that might be the reason why. The big question is being a flight attendant worth it? Is it ultimately worth it having this as a long-term career? Whether it's worth it or not, in my opinion, to a large extent, depends on these pros and cons. The first thing I do want to talk about is the pay. I'm starting off with the pay because the pay can be both a pro and it can be both a con, in the sense that, starting off with the con, depending on the airline you work for, guys, your pay might not be what it needs to be. And even if you're with the best of airlines, right, and the pay conditions are tax-free, are this or that, and are all good, there's still an element of con or disadvantage in a way. So in terms of the pay being a con, depending on the airline, if whether you're working with a major US airline, if it's mainline or regional, if it's regional, your pay is likely to be lower than one would expect if they're working with a mainline airline, right? When I first started, my hourly pay as a new flight attendant was, I believe, like $32 and some change. But at the same time, if somebody was at regional, it would have been below that. It would have been 28, 25, or even 20 something. I don't know, but it would be less than whatever it is that I was getting working with a major US airline company, right? So in that regard, it's a con in the sense that, knowing what I know about the job now, if you're earning anything below $30, it's not enough. If you want to push the envelope, I will say if you're earning below $35 an hour, it's not enough. It's not enough in the sense that with the way our job works, you can go on a 3-day trip, right? Although you're away for 3 days, which is 72 hours, depending on when you start and when you're released, but let's say averagely it's about 60 hours, right? Ultimately, you're not getting paid your hourly pay of the $30, 60 hours because you were away for that long. No, it doesn't work that way. Our pay structure is very, very different. So ultimately, your hourly pay needs to be very high to make a difference in terms of your take-home pay. And also, the job can be ultimately exhausting. All things being equal, we're not usually scheduled 160 hours a month like a typical 9-to-5. This can be a con and a pro depending on how you look at it. Because the schedule is not like that, by default, giving like 82 hours, 80 hours, 90 hours top. So essentially, if you're going to work only those hours at a new higher rate, you won't be making enough to live off of compared to somebody who's been here longer. So the way the pay also works with it being a con is that when you're new, your pay is usually lower compared to somebody who's been there longer. So that's the issue with the pay and why people are always complaining about the pay not being enough, because for the most part, we're not getting paid the entire time we spend while we're at work compared to somebody who works a typical 9-to-5. You clock in, you're getting paid. You clock out, you're done. Okay. What makes this job worth it to an extent when it comes to the pay on the pro side is that the pay is relatively higher, especially if you're just getting out of college and you're now about to start a career or look for a job to do. It's relatively good. It's good compared to other jobs that I've had and the demand for the jobs that I've had, right? So comparing those, it's good. And for something that you want to do long term, the pay is good enough for it. To me, it's worth it. If you want to make money, you can make money. An example is last year, 2024, in July and August, I wanted to see how much I could potentially earn by stacking my schedule as much as I possibly physically could do. And when I did that, I made over $7,000 in July. I made about $7,300 in July. Then in August, I made about $7,800 in July. I made almost $8,000 a month being a new hire, first year hire. So potentially, if you are willing to work more, you can make more money, and there's room to work more. Because some jobs, for example, you might not even have access to overtime, right? But this, it's not necessarily overtime, but more hours. That's another thing. We don't necessarily get overtime pay per se compared to another job where you're working your 40 a week. If you do more than that, it automatically jumps or becomes overtime. So that's where the nuances come in. But overall, for this point alone, I will say with pay alone, with my airline, I think it's good. It's worth it because the longer you stay, the higher your pay becomes. The second thing that I do want to talk about with regards to if being a flight attendant is ultimately worth it is the flexibility. With regards to flexibility, that's one of the main reasons why I became a flight attendant. That was a non-negotiable for me. I have never worked in any industry or any job profile except for this job where I have this amount of flexibility. Knowing that I have the power to be able to say, okay, I'm scheduled to work this trip on these dates. However, I don't feel like working it, or I can't because I have an emergency come up. Let me move it or swap it to this date. That amount of power to have for me is ultimate. So in theory, you're supposed to have the ability to swap out your trips, swap with other flight attendants, swap with the system, drop trips to give you power over your schedule, to be able to work more or work less, depending on what you're feeling or the vibe you're in that month, right? I'm not talking about calling out sick or going on vacation. I'm talking about having just a regular schedule and being able to move your trips around, or possibly have somebody pick up a trip you don't want to work, drop stuff, or swap with people or the system. That is a whole different level of flexibility. However, on the flip side, looking at the con of it, in theory, that's what it's supposed to be. That's the concept. That's what these airlines sell or market to new potential hires. However, the reality is that depending on how things are going within that month, it might be hard to swap out of trips. It might be hard to get trips picked up by other flight attendants. It is hard to swap with the system itself, and you might ask for time off and you might not even get it, because that's another thing, guys. Our vacation times and times off are not the regular way, like the typical 9 to 5, how it works, okay? It's a whole beast. It's a whole situation. It's a whole different concept, especially if you've worked with different companies. When you come into this industry, you're going to notice real quickly how different and how complex it can be. I'm saying all that to say that in theory, flexibility is great, but realistically, sometimes swapping is hard. Sometimes it's a headache just trying to get rid of a trip. In that sense, it takes away the power you have when it comes to flexibility with this job. So in that case, you might in the moment feel like it's not worth it being a flight attendant, but then on a good day or the good months where the flexibility is so high that you do have that power, or you're able to be as flexible as you want to be, then it makes it worth it in that regard. The third point that I do want to talk about is work-life balance as against being on reserve. So let's talk about the con, which is being on reserve. Personally, I hate being on reserve, not necessarily because I have to be on call or anything, but it's just the anxiety associated with it. The fear that I might miss the call when I get the call, the fear that I might miss the assignment when I get the assignment. That uncertainty I do not appreciate at all. It puts my anxiety through the roof, okay? I don't like it. I don't mind being on reserve and knowing that, okay, I'm gonna be on reserve, and then this is the assignment that I got for being on reserve. Somebody called out and I got assigned something immediately the day before, the night before. But the thought that I have to be on reserve and not know when I'm going to get called or when I'm going to be used, I don't like that feeling at all. You are getting paid as you're waiting or playing the waiting game and waiting to be called, among other things, but I just don't like the pressure that comes with it. The other con about being on reserve is that sometimes you can be on reserve for a long time. My airline makes it such that we are on reserve 247 for 6 days, okay? It doesn't have to be 6 days. You can break it up into 2 sets of 3 days, right? But it's 24 hours. That's how stressful it can be. It's literally 24 hours throughout the day. Some airlines are different. You do have AM and PM shifts where you're on reserve only 12 hours out of the day. After 12 hours, essentially, you are, in this case, released. That's what it would imply. But with those airlines also, what happens is that typically it means you're on reserve the entire month. Mine is not like that. It's only 6 days out of the month, and I have the luxury or the ability to bid for trips or pick up trips on my days off. If you work with any other airline, let me know what your reserve system is. Share in the comment section below. But on the flip side, side, I will say the pro of this job comparable to being on reserve is a work-life balance. Like I said in the beginning, I've been a manager before. I worked with Amazon, and your work followed you home, guys. Like, you could not detach. I could not detach myself the way I wanted to from work, even when I was away from work. But with being a flight attendant, once those doors open, it's over. Once those doors open and everybody gets off the plane, the show is over. Once the door opens and I step off that aircraft, whatever I did, it's over. When I go home, on my way home, I have no reason to be thinking about work. I have no paperwork to deal with, okay? So I love the work-life balance that this offers because of that. Work doesn't follow you home. Once you're done, you're done. I'd weigh the two and see if it's worth being a flight attendant. The other thing that I do want to talk about comparably is being a flight attendant potentially being a long-term career compared to it being exhausting and potentially being burned out from just the stress of the job, right? So as much as there is a good work-life balance, like I said in the earlier point, it can be exhausting sometimes. Like, it's one of those things where because you're doing the same thing over and over again, after a while it becomes monotonous in a way that you don't necessarily notice the tiredness, the exhaustion, and you being burned out. It's like a slow killer in a way, right? Because think about it, you're traveling to all these beautiful layovers, you're enjoying yourself, you're having fun, you're eating out, you're hanging out with friends, you're potentially working trips or flights with your friends, right? So you're having fun, but underneath it all, you're also going to different countries, going to different cities, different time zones. You're not sleeping. Your sleep pattern is messed up, right? And that can lead to exhaustion. That can lead to burnout. I have a video where I talk about getting burnt out as a flight attendant, getting overly stimulated, getting stressed out while doing this job. Overstimulation is a thing. I remember at some point, I did not want to be around other human beings after work. Like, once I was done with work, once I got off that aircraft and I went home, I wanted a peace and quiet environment, right? So you can easily get exhausted and burnt out, and that can make your career or this career of yours become short-lived. So that's why I always advocate for people to take care of themselves. But that being said, on the flip side, if you're able to get over this hurdle or be able to find yourself in a position where you're able to manage your schedule, manage what you do, how you work, how you go back and forth to and from the airport or in and out of this job, you can ultimately have this as a long-term career. And the longer you've been here, the more rewarding the job becomes in terms of pay, in terms of benefit, in terms of seniority, in terms of your schedule, right? So you essentially have to put in the work in the beginning and be able to get to that point. But most of the time, people don't get to that point and they quit too early. That's why in the beginning, when I started, I always advocated for, in as much as you do want to make money because you know the hourly pay is good, take your time. You want to do this long term because you've invested time to get to where you are right now. Always start with a slow start so you don't get burnt out or exhausted. But once you're able to get to that point or go over that hurdle as a long-term career, this is perfect. Final point that I do want to talk about is the flight benefits as against commuting. And when it comes to whether it's worth being a flight attendant, two things you need to consider: flight benefits and commuting. The reason why I have these side by side, commuting being a con and the flight benefits being a pro, is because those are major trade-offs. Commuting in the sense that these airlines sell or market to new hires that you can live anywhere in the world for the most part, at least with the US based airlines. I can't speak to the airlines that are based in the Middle East or Europe, but at least with the US based airlines, the way the whole package or the career is advertised is that you can live in any parts of the world, which is true, and be able to do this job. However, there's a big however, that is dependent on you being able to get yourself to work. That said, you being able to get yourself to work, although you have flight benefits that you can use to get yourself to work, coming to work, the flights you take to come to work are not guaranteed. Your seats are not guaranteed. You're ultimately flying standby just to get to work. So you're competing with individuals that are going for leisure trips that are flying standby using the flight benefits. You see how that ties in? So essentially, just because I'm commuting to work doesn't mean that the airline is gonna say, because you're coming to work, here's an assigned seat for you to get to work, okay? It's not like that. It's only on situational circumstances or issues, certain circumstances that lead us to get those assigned seats or guaranteed seats to get to and from work. It's when something goes wrong, okay? So like COVID, for example, commuting can be a hassle. Although I will be commuting soon, it's a job on its own. The only difference is that you're not getting paid. And it means you have to get a residence where you're gonna be commuting to, whether it's a crash pad or another apartment. And sometimes that can be a deal breaker when it comes to this job. And I feel like aside from pay, commuting is the second biggest thing that I think causes people to not enjoy this job, because it's stressful going back and forth, trying to get to work, not being able to get to work, and just being on the flights, among other things, can be a lot. It can be exhausting. And that means you're spending extra time away from home, because if you live at base, you can just get up and go to work. But if you commute, you probably have to come in the day before. But that's a con. So if you're considering a flight attendant, if you want to know if this job is worth it at all, you have to consider that. On the flip side, another perk of this job is the flight benefits. In theory, 100%, 10 over 10 chef's kiss is the best benefit you can get, especially if you're somebody who loves to travel or wants the opportunity to travel around the world, especially if the airline you work for travels around the world. Even if they don't, they typically have partnership with other airlines that can give you the ability or the access to be able to travel around the world for ultimately little to no cost at all. So that's a really, really great perk. That was one of the second reasons why I became a flight attendant. The flight benefits and the flexibility of the job. That was second. Flexibility was number one. You can share them with family and friends as well. So that's definitely a huge, huge benefit. And that's if you want to fly on your own time. Aside from that, doing this job alone, when you fly to London, Amsterdam, Paris, or even if you come to Ghana, like anywhere in the world, you're working to those destinations, but you have layovers that can give you time to enjoy those layovers as well. So that can be a perk. And typically when you're working, you're getting paid while you're on your layover. So that's like a plus. So the big question is, being a flight attendant worth it? Ultimately, I will say it depends on you. Based on the pros and cons that I shared, you have to weigh where your non-negotiables are, where your priorities lie, what is more important to you, what you're willing to compromise on, and that will answer your question. But in my opinion, it's worth it, especially if you start early. To actually benefit and enjoy this job to its fullest, start early. I wish I made the decision to become a flight attendant when I was 21. Based on what I know now, go for it, and be specific or be very, very particular with the airline you choose as well, because the airline you choose to work for can make or break your experience in this industry. It is worth it. So if you are considering being a flight attendant, in the description box, I have a link there. It's a playlist on how to become a flight attendant where I shared my journey from start to finish. Thank you all for watching today's video. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.